Well, maybe over the weekend, a little leprechaun stole your bracket, or maybe you got a glimpse of Cinderella and she's dancing right out of Palo Alto, California. Well, the 2023 NCAA tournament is rocking and rolling, and we've got to break it all down, and it starts right now.
Ogunbowale for the win. Good!
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Well, happy Monday, friends. It is March 20th, 2023. I am Missy Heidrick, National Women's Basketball Correspondent at The Next. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code Locked On. Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Missy Heidrick. Be sure to follow this podcast at Locked On WBB and get yourself over to The Next at www.thenexthoops.com. We have you covered. Well, let me just say, Hotty Toddy, gosh almighty, brackets were busted all across the country last night with the fall of the number one seeded Stanford Cardinal at the hands of Ole Miss. What happened? Are we going to dive? We are going to dive right into all of this, and along with other big wins in the first and second round of this year's big dance. Have there been teams maybe overseeded or underseeded? Ones that have been overlooked, or ones people have completely forgotten? We are not sure. Also, the second half of the Sweet 16 will be booked tonight. So hold on, friends. The road to the Final Four is just getting a little bit bumpy. Here to break it all down with me today is one of the outstanding journalists who has been covering Stanford in the NCAA tournament for the Bay Area news groups, Alex Simon. Alex, my friend, what happened last night in Maples Pavilion?
It was quite the defensive showdown, wasn't it? I mean, I will give the Stanford crowd a lot of credit. That place was not sold out, but it was really full and actually extremely raucous. But this is a Stanford team that we've kind of identified some of the struggles that they've had all season. And there's even a few of them that we thought could be issues going into the season. And as talented as they were, a very athletic, very defensively stout Ole Miss team kind of dared Stanford to beat them with offense, and Stanford wasn't able to do it.
Okay, so a couple things. First and foremost, this is a 54-49 win by Ole Miss. They were the number 8 seed coming in this tournament over number 1 Stanford. Stanford now the first number 1 seed since 2009 to fail to reach the Sweet 16 in the women's tournament.
And just the 5th time since we've had a 64-team tournament in 1994. So
which is insane.
It's very rare what we saw last night.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, 3 years ago, this is an Ole Miss team that went winless in SEC play. Back-to-back NCAA tournament trips. A year ago, they were sent out in the first round. I thought a very unassuming, very lackadaisical effort by Ole Miss. They had Shakira Austin. She was a top 5 draft pick in the WNBA. They get beat by South Dakota, a mid-major team. They were done. A lot of questions about what this Ole Miss squad was going to look like this year, but they battled, and they just seemed to have a mentality that they could stay in games, that they could play with top teams. We saw them do it with South Carolina. We saw them do it with LSU. And that was one of the things I think I took out of some of the comments from players, and obviously from Coach Yo, who is just, I think, a polarizing and a fantastic ambassador for women's basketball. But they kept talking about battle tested. Is that what you saw last night, was a team that was battle tested and wasn't going to back down from anybody?
Yeah, I mean, this Ole Miss team, you know, there was only 2 teams in the country in the regular season, and still to this point, that have taken South Carolina to overtime. One of them was Stanford. The other one is Ole Miss. So, you know, for them, they looked at it and said, we've taken some losses. Our seed is our seed, but like we've shown that like we can come into these games and compete with the top teams in the country. And especially, you know, it's crazy to say it, but last year's roster, there was a lot of people who were flipped over from last year's roster. Not just Shakira Austin going to the draft, but a ton of players transferred out. Yolette McPhee-McEwen brought 6 players in from the transfer portal, let alone a high school recruit. So there was just a different look to this team. And she has said that she's never had a group that's loved each other as much as this group has. They've seemed to really click. And, it's not necessarily a group. Angel Baker definitely is what I would say their star player, but I wouldn't call her even a superstar player, in part because this team can beat you with a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. And even though they don't necessarily, and especially last night against Stanford, they don't have the height to match up, but they had no problems rebounding. They actually out-rebounded Stanford, which was only the 4th time the Cardinal have lost the rebounding battle all season. And Stanford has had all sorts of issues all season with turnovers. But if you are turning the ball over a lot, you can kind of cover that up by out-rebounding your opponent, especially on the offensive glass. Hey, if you give away possessions, well, the offensive glass can extend your possessions and make that not hurt as much. The combination of losing the rebounding battle and turning the ball over 21 times, there's not many teams in the country that can win in a game like that, no matter how talented you are.
No, absolutely. And I think, I'm looking at the box score here, and a couple of those things absolutely jumped out to me. Number one, that they're Stanford goes out rebounded. They only score 49 points. Keep in mind, Ole Miss, they held their opponent in the first round, Gonzaga, to under 50 as well.
It was 48. So
yeah,
they got worse defensively. They only gave up 1 more point.
Which is pretty darn good. And so, that old adage of defense wins championships, it wins you games in the NCAA tournament. There's no doubt about it. They go 5 of 11 from behind the 3-point line, didn't necessarily force it, took shots that they could get, 10 of 12 from the free throw line in the 4th quarter. 3 players hit double figures. But the one that I circled, not only about out-rebounding somebody, it's the 21 turnovers that Stanford had that Ole Miss turned into 24 points. You can't survive in any situation, conference, non-con, tournament play, turning the ball over that much and giving up that many points in return.
And not just that, it's crazy. This was a game Stanford, I don't believe, ever led at any point in this game. But yet, if you're the Cardinal, even when if you're at halftime and you could go to Tara Vanderveer and the team and say, hey, you're going to have the ball with 30 seconds left in a tie game. You take that and run when you're down by 13 middle of the 3rd quarter. Their defense really stood up in the 4th quarter, and I think they held Ole Miss scoreless from the 5:46 mark until basically 20 seconds to go. So they allowed themselves to get back in. The thing that just stands out to me, Ole Miss contested everything. I counted in the broadcast book last night with the stats. There was 21 shots that Stanford had marked as layups that they missed.
Wow.
And especially for a team that's so dependent on inside scoring. They've really stopped shooting the ball outside of Hannah Jump, occasionally Talana Lopolo, but they've really become an inside paint-oriented offense. And this Stanford team everything was contested in the paint, and they could not make a layup. And it was really a perfect storm of a situation for Stanford to lose a game, but you have to give credit to Ole Miss for creating that, because my goodness, it was an amazing defensive effort from the Rebels.
Yeah, I think what and as we said, defense was championships. I think they made them uncomfortable all night, and they just never seemed to find a rhythm offensively. Yes, you can get stops, but you've got to be able to make shots on the other end. And if they're contested shots and it's difficult, that makes it more hard. I want to ask you, having been around and seen the Stanford squad now over the course of this season, but just over the last few days, we know that Cameron Brink was not 100%, did not play in their 1st round game, dealing with some health issues, non-COVID related, as they said. She and Haley Jones, really the only bright spots. I guess as we sit here and dissect and digest the fact that a number 1 seed is no longer in this tournament, what stands out to you in terms of what Stanford did not do and what they have struggled with over the course of the last few weeks?
Yeah, I think this is a Stanford team that kind of has grown, kind of like I was saying, into an inside paint scoring team. And they really only have Hannah Jump, who can reliably make a 3-point shot. Last night, she made the only 2 that they had. They only took 7. This is a Stanford team that in the past under Tara Vanderveer has been firing from 3 with no regard for human life. In that regard, they're happy to put up 20, 25, 30 attempts. And that's just not the personnel that this team was. I was talking, and especially there were some of us in the media, including some folks here at the Next. This Stanford team, just the roster, the way it shaped up, it was incredibly imbalanced. Mm-hmm. They were extremely deep, almost too deep. You could make a case inside. You can only really play 2 of Cameron Brink, Kiki Iriafen, Lauren Betts, Fran Believy, Ashton Prechtel. You can only really play 2 of those players at a time. But yet at the guard level, they were frequently last night going even with 2 freshmen on the court together in Talana Lapolo and India Navarre. And Tara Vanderveer in the postgame kind of was saying, like, our freshmen were really inexperienced. And, she's a big believer that guards win tournament games and help you do that. And you can maybe chalk up a lot of the turnovers to the fact that the Cardinal have had to so often ask Haley Jones to effectively play point forward for them. And she's very capable of doing it. But it's a huge ask given that Haley sat for all of 2 seconds in last night's game to constantly be the one doing that when you're responsible for so much on the defensive end, and when it's really, I would not say your best position if you're Haley Jones to be a true point forward without anyone else there to help you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and I think we can't be remiss in just tipping our cap to the performance of Ole Miss, what they did in the first game against Gonzaga, what they were able to do against the number 1 seed. This is obviously a group, they are going to embrace this opportunity. You can see the joy and the fun and just the cohesiveness of that group. As you look at them, we've seen it happen all the time in the tournament, men's, women's, etc. Year after year, somebody has a big win, they make it to the next point, and then you see that drop down. I know it's going to be difficult for them to maybe play at this kind of level, but they're going to face the winner of the Louisville, Texas game in the Sweet 16 that gets played today. As you look at this Ole Miss squad, do they have an opportunity to get another win in this tournament, you think?
I mean, there's zero reason in my mind to think that they won't have a chance to make the Final Four, because if you kind of look at this bracket that they're in now, the winner of that matchup, they've played the higher quality teams. They can be super defensive. I think the key for them is going to be to figure out their own offense. Mm-hmm. And what we saw from them last night, you brought up the points off of turnovers. They also had 14 fast break points. And against anybody, if they're able to kind of get out with pace, their defense will travel. I do actually think, the fact to me that Ole Miss is not going back to campus in Mississippi, but they're actually heading straight up to Seattle today mm-hmm. on Monday. Mm-hmm. I think that might help, just because you can keep we're just on the road still. It would be awesome to go home and get the love, get the support, kind of have the whole campus come around. But that might be the thing that takes your foot off the gas in mm-hmm. that way, getting the love, the adulation, and all that. By going straight to Seattle, you can at least have a little bit of fun, maybe take a day off, get your rest going. But it's still a business trip in that regard for them at this point. And I would assume that Coach Yo, for as much as this means everything, the win on Friday night was the first tournament win the school had in a while, and Coach Yo's first as a head coach. It meant a lot to her then, and they had no problem being ready to go for Stanford. I will be fascinated to see how this Ole Miss team handles the time, but I don't have any reason to doubt that they won't handle it well.
I agree with you. I think it's all about focus, 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 and that's exactly where they are headed. Okay, when we come back, we're going to take a peek at some of the other upsets, close calls, surprises so far outside of what Alex witnessed at the farm at Stanford last night. But first, a message from our friends at Prize Picks. So how does this work? Well, you're going to pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will go score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And Prize Picks offers projections in any sport that you watch. This includes NBA, MLB, NHL, college basketball, women's college basketball, soccer, you name it, they've got it. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy, safe, and fast withdrawals, currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So you can go ahead and do Prize Picks right up against the Raptors if you'd like. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Hi, everybody. I am Missy Heidrick, and thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today. I am here with Alex Simon. He was in the building at Maples Pavilion last night for the big upset of Ole Miss over Stanford. A number 8 takes down a number 1 for the first time since 2009. A number 1 seed will fail to reach the Sweet 16 in the women's tournament. And so we've also got to look, Alex, I think, at some of the other interesting games and things that have happened over the course of the last couple days outside of what has happened in the Bay Area for you. All right, a couple teams on to the Sweet 16, 2 number 1s. South Carolina, they take care of their own business with South Florida. It's just sort of one of those workmanlike. It's not overly flashy, but next thing you know, it's a 76-45 win and South Carolina moves on. But I've thought that Virginia Tech's bracket and what they like to call Seattle 3, the Seattle 3 regional, I've always thought that this Virginia Tech bracket was incredibly interesting to me. I just think the teams and the storylines that were there. We saw South Dakota State. They took down USC in overtime to reach the second round. They matched up with Virginia Tech yesterday. It was a raucous crowd there. But this seems to me to also be a Virginia Tech team that's kind of on a mission. They have dialed in. They've had great success. They won the ACC tournament. This just looks like a group that is firing on all cylinders. What's your take on Virginia Tech?
Yeah, I mean, South Carolina excluded because that's undefeated, never lost this year. Yeah. Virginia Tech's the hottest team in the country.
Yeah.
And they've certainly played like it. I mean, they blitzed out on South Dakota State to start the game. I know the number kind of bled back down to only being a 12-point win, but they were up by 20 plus, I believe, at one point in that game. This team, I mean, to me, this team was pretty without question going to be a 1 seed with the way that they finished their season in the ACC. And everything about them has looked good. And it's in part because, you know, to use Tara Vanderveer talking about guards winning you games. Well, Georgia Amore has maybe become the most important player in the country. And this is even with Elizabeth Kitley, who is an incredible center and multiple-time ACC Player of the Year. But Georgia Amore's emergence in March specifically at the ACC tournament, what she did last night, I think it was, 24 points last night. She has become, I think, one of the most important players here. And especially, you know, they'll take on either Tennessee or Toledo. I think even Tennessee would be a very fascinating matchup. I still would favor Virginia Tech in that one. And Virginia Tech won that game earlier this year. But if you kind of look at the rest of this region, you know, North Carolina, a team Virginia Tech has played and beaten, very close game. But Ohio State had some struggles with JMU. UConn would be the team that you maybe look at and say that's who they would set up for an Elite 8 game with. But Amore is somebody that it would be difficult for anybody in this region right now to have an answer when you also have to be responsible for Kitley inside. And
no, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's balance. I mean, that's one of the things that people forget sometimes. You know, we've heard coaches and everybody wants to use this comment of parity and what have you, which I think is absolutely true because I think we're seeing it in incredibly competitive games and some storylines and upsets. But on the flip side, if I can have a roster that's balanced from top to bottom, and yes, having the ACC Player of the Year and my interior in Elizabeth Kitley, that's an extra bonus. But you add to that good guard play and other people that make plays, I think Virginia Tech becomes really hard to beat. On the flip side, other people look at something like a team like Iowa, same thing. They've got a star that they resonate around with Caitlin Clark, but it is her supporting cast that has been playing better over the past couple weeks. And they seem to put themselves on display. 74-66, they beat Georgia. It was a physical game. We know Georgia's going to come at you. They're going to bring everything they got. But I thought that was maybe a really good test for Iowa, sort of the survive and advance mentality.
Katie Abramson-Henderson's team's playing a physical game in March. I feel like we've never seen that before, sarcastically speaking. And yeah, that is what Abe's teams do. They did it at UCF. Last year, they gave UConn probably one of their toughest games until literally the national championship game in the second round when she was still at UCF. She goes to Georgia. For her, she's an Iowa girl. She comes home to the, coaching the school she started her career at, coaching against the school she ended her playing career at. And Georgia put up a heck of a fight for as down. And I think a lot of people were rightly down on the SEC this year. It has been an incredible March for the SEC in the NCAA tournament. Mississippi State pulls off 2 wins, gets an upset, looks really good against Notre Dame, a team that I'm sure we were coming to next. Georgia looks really good. Obviously, Ole Miss gets the win. Tennessee's still alive, so that you could have 3 SEC teams in the Sweet 16 still, even with a couple of close losses here. I think Iowa, the thing about Iowa is that I've had to even check myself on this, because we kind of fall into the trap that they're not a good defensive team, because for a while they weren't, and especially at the start of the year. But as the season's gone on, if you kind of look at their adjusted ratings, if you check their defensive numbers, they have grown into a pretty solid defensive team. Not great. They're not at the levels of the teams that I saw here at Stanford last night.
Right.
But they have certainly improved on that end, that they can win a game where you don't need to hit the 80s, the 90s, the 100s in order to win your basketball game. Last night, I mean, there was free throws at the end, but they effectively won that game at 70 points. And if I was able to win games in which it is a little more difficult for them to score the way that it was yesterday, that portends to a lot of good things, especially if they don't have to see this Stanford team down the line anymore in their region. And it might be setting up a road where, we get Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston in the Final Four head-to-head.
Yeah.
That path is now there for the Hawkeyes. And that's pretty fun for the rest of us, isn't it?
No, I agree with you. I think that whole thing just opened up and it changed the conversation in a multitude of ways. 2 other teams I want to mention. You said it, Notre Dame. First off, I think the grind out feel good story. Well, it was a grind out win over the feel good story of Mississippi State. I love the attitude, the mentality, what Sam Purcell is doing there. I think that is going to be an SEC program on the rise, no doubt about it from the get-go. But this Notre Dame team, they figure out how to do it. Niele Ivey, she's down 2 starters, and not just 2 average starters. She's down an All-American caliber point guard and one of the best shooters that program has ever seen.
Not just All-American caliber, and All-American.
Yeah,
just period.
Absolutely. And Lauren Ebo comes in, the Texas transfer. She had 10 points, 18 rebounds, 5 blocks. They win 53-48. I feel like it's just, you got to do whatever you got to do. And we are in that survive and advance mentality. Notre Dame did that yesterday. The other team I wanted to get your thoughts on, who I think sometimes might get overlooked in all of this because we talk a lot about Iowa, but it's Maryland. And I think Maryland is somebody, they win 77-64 over Arizona. Diamond Miller, 24 points, 6 boards, 7 assists. This is just not a run-of-the-mill Maryland team. They can play with pretty much anybody.
Yeah, I mean, even yesterday, right? They're losing at halftime. They start really well, but then the second quarter goes horribly wrong for them. Arizona outscores them by 10. Arizona's got the lead at half, feels like the momentum. And third quarter come out, and it's a 29-9 Maryland third quarter, and they just blew the doors off of the game, off of everything. Diamond Miller, I mean, Haley Jones was the number 1 pick, the number 1 high school recruit over here in the Bay Area. And Aaliyah Boston has very clearly become the player who's going to go number 1 in this draft. But Diamond Miller, it's performances like yesterday that she gives, where she seems to be pretty clearly the number 2 person in the WNBA draft. When I listen to our Saturday guys over on the draft show, like, there's not a question in any of their minds where Diamond's going to go. And, 24 points, and especially, on 11 of 19 shooting.
Yeah.
So it's a great mid-range game. She didn't even get to the foul line that much to add to that, which shows that, it's all her scoring ability. Add on top of that, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 steals. She's incredible. And they fit this Maryland team kind of together really well. And I think that's the thing. Brenda Freese, another person who's kind of flipped the roster in the transfer portal and been definitely had some eyebrows raised with the players coming, players going. But, every year she puts together a team that looks really solid and makes some noise here in March. And this one's not going to be any different.
No, I agree with you. I think I wouldn't necessarily want to see them in the Sweet 16. So there are going to be some very, very good matchups coming. Well, okay, we still have games left in this second round to book this year's Sweet 16 in total. So when we come back, just a look at what to watch for today, Monday, March 20th. Could there be another Cinderella story to join Ole Miss? That is the question. All right, but first, a couple messages from our friends at Nissan. Nissan's most electric player of the week is brought to you by the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. Well, for me, this week's most electric player of the week goes to the entire Ole Miss squad. In 2 games, they have allowed neither opponent to score over 20 points. They take down the number 1 seed on their home court. They are on their way to the Sweet 16. They get my vote. You talk about not only fantastic performances, but the fact that they did it together. They were brilliant, they were fierce, and they were powerful as a group. Exactly what you are looking for. The 2023 Nissan Ariya packs pin-you-to-your-seat power and premium intelligence all in one EV. The all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. The EV for people who love to drive. Shop now at nissanusa.com. Also, have you heard that the Built March Madness bracket is here? We know you have a favorite Built bar or puff, and now it's time to make it count. So you got to go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. I'll be voting for one, and then you get to vote for your team. So if you want Maryland to win, or if you want Ole Miss to win, then you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team and support your bar or puff. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built. It's the best protein bar ever. They do amazing how you wouldn't even think that they're actually good for you. So run to builtmarchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick.
I'm a double chocolate guy.
There it is. He voted for the double chocolate. One and done. Hi, everybody. That's the voice of Alex Simon. I am Missy Heidrick. Thank you so much for joining us here on Locked On Women's Basketball. All right, Alex, we still have 1 day left of second round in the 2023 Women's NCAA Tournament. We have seen upsets. We have seen a couple barn burners. We have seen games come down to the wire. We've seen a few blowouts here or there. As I look at the games that we are going to see today, starting first off, 3 o'clock Central Time on ESPN, North Carolina, Ohio State. 2 teams who I feel like just really absolutely had the survive and advance mentality. Did not necessarily play their best basketball to start. I don't know if this is what Ohio State needed, if they needed that wake-up call against James Madison. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like this might be the opportunity for North Carolina to get over the hump. They're not hosting. They had to go on the road. I could see the 6 beat the 3 and North Carolina get out of there with a win.
Yeah, North Carolina. I mean, I was actually there in Tucson last year when the Tar Heels went into Tucson at McHale in a raucous environment and knocked off Arizona on their home floor to reach the Sweet 16. It's certainly possible. I do wonder if North Carolina has enough offense, but Ohio State's defense is not good enough, I think, to cause the same types of problems that I've seen North Carolina have at some of their games. You know, I was in Cameron Indoor when they won a game against Duke while only scoring 45 points.
Right. Duke
then played them again and held them to 40 for the win a few days later in the ACC tournament. But this North Carolina team certainly is capable of winning this game, and they've played teams in the Big Ten that they've lost to during the season, but they have a schedule that should leave them battle tested. It should be an incredible game. If I'm looking for an upset, I think I have 2 that come to mind that I'll throw the first one at you, and it's really not as big of an upset on the seed line, but do we have any reason to think that the Louisville team that we saw isn't the one that we finally have seen? You know, this is a team that really struggled in the non-conference and did suffer some losses, but they've been a lot better come ACC conference play. They've looked really good. Obviously, they beat up a really injured Notre Dame team in the ACC tournament, but they play at Texas today. And while I really like Texas, I kind of think Louisville especially should cover what FanDuel lists as a 7.5 point spread. They're underdogs by 7.5. I think Louisville will at least be closer than that, if not just outright win the game. The other one is Colorado. I know defense wins you in March, but like you're not seeing teams winning 2-0 anymore. It's not like the 1910s and 20s.
You can't do that anymore. You can't stall your way through 40 minutes.
And I just think this Duke team cannot, like, I don't trust them to hit 50. And 50 is not that big of a number.
Yeah.
And I can see this Colorado team do it. I really can. And they also are a 7.5 point underdog, according to FanDuel. At minimum, I would think both of those teams to cover in true road environments seems like a safe play, and maybe even outright win the games.
Well, I had that Louisville, Texas game also. That's 6:00 Central Time on ESPN tonight. That is the 5 seed Louisville at Texas, the 4. And I think my biggest question is it's not necessarily maybe as much about Louisville as it is more about Texas. I know they handled East Carolina in that first round game at home. Rory Harmon is the engine that makes them go. There is no doubt about it. But the biggest question mark came to me, and having watched them in person at the Big 12 tournament, lose to Iowa State in the finals, was just putting together that 40 minutes. Can they, especially when they have their backs up against the wall, when things aren't incredibly easy, when people make shots, that their defense isn't necessarily dictating things, and then they have to have an answer. Rory Harmon can't do it all by herself. She's got to have some help. And whether that's a post game or that's people on the perimeter, this is not a one-woman show. She is not that much of a difference maker, especially scoring the basketball. She has to have other people to distribute to make things happen. So I agree with you. I thought Louisville played way better than I thought they would have the other day, and very well may be coming together. And this could be the right time for Louisville to get back to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, the other 4-5 matchup today that we have, because we don't have a 4-5 in Philly since Florida Gulf Coast upset Washington State. I do wonder if you're willing to stay up all the way to 9 p.m. God's time is what I'd call Central Time. God's time for UCLA, Oklahoma.
Yes.
The Sooners have been one of the more interesting teams to me all season, because there are times where they just look incredible, but they don't show up sometimes. But this is a UCLA team that, you know, has been in kind of the same boat to me. And it's definitely a game that I just have no feel on, even having seen UCLA in person, because they do have quite a bit of talent and quite a bit of depth. But just watching them play, you know, if people are willing to stay up for it, I think you might get as good of a game as we got here last night in California. So. Oh,
absolutely. And I will tell you this right now. You stay up for that game, 9:00 Central, that's 10:00 Eastern out on that East Coast. I apologize for you, but you will not necessarily you will not necessarily see the defensive effort. You will not see the defensive game that you saw last night in Palo Alto. You will see offense. This will be up and down, run and gun, go, go, go. Oklahoma doesn't play a lot of defense, but that's okay. They want to score. They want to go. That's the system they have. When they need to, they'll get a few stops, but this Oklahoma team, they are looking to score.
FanDuel has that as the highest total for the over-under of any of the 8 games today. It's at 152.5. Nothing else is in close to the 150s. There's like a few in the 140s. So even everybody's telling you that's the offense game. If you stay up, we're going to see some hoops. Yes. We're going to see some baskets. And
it'll keep you entertained. That game will keep you entertained. Okay, before I let you go.
I would argue last night's game was very entertaining, even without offense. And look, like, I want to just make sure at this point, like, Cameron Brink might be the best player in the country. I know this is going to be hyperbolic, especially after Stanford lost, but she was very clearly not right. She even said she was feeling sick. But what she did last night, especially, she at times has been kind of called soft and whatnot. She's obviously not as physically big as some players her height can be, but she sought out contact last night in the fourth quarter, and she could very clearly, you could see a flip switched in her brain. Like, I need to get to the free throw line because that's the only way we can reliably score right now. Right. She knocked down all 10 free throws, 20 points, 13 rebounds, 7 blocks. It's a bummer for the nation. As great as it is for Ole Miss, it's a bummer for the nation specifically that we don't get more Cam Brink this year, because she was just absolutely sensational.
No, I would agree with you there. And that's the heartbreak of the NCAA tournament in total, isn't it? Is that we know that there are outstanding players and teams that no longer are going to be on the biggest stage that we get to see. And that's the hard part. However, somebody else stepped up in the moment to survive and advance. It doesn't matter if you win by 1 or 21. We can come up with every cliche possible, but somebody else did. And those teams continue to stay on this big stage. There are two games I want everybody to also keep their eye on today, Monday, March 20th. The 5 o'clock game, 5 o'clock Central, ESPN2, that would be the number 4 Tennessee Lady Vols at home. They go against number 12 Toledo. Toledo, they handled Iowa State over the weekend. It seemed as though they didn't even blink. And if there's a 4-12 matchup, that might be it. Keep your eyes on Toledo. The other one is the other 4-12 that we get, and that will be at 6 o'clock on ESPNU Central Time, and that is Florida Gulf Coast versus at Villanova, the 4 seed. Florida Gulf Coast is the 12. They took down Washington State, really had zero trouble, may be the underseeded team in this tournament, but they know that going in, coming from a mid-major, it's a 1-bid league. This is what happens, but they could give Villanova fits tonight. I would keep your eye on that one.
Florida Gulf Coast, the second most wins of any team in the nation. They have 33. That's only South Carolina's got more than them right now. That's this team wins, and it is important to note, while they were the 12 seed against a 5 seed Washington State, they were not an upset winner there. They were the favorites according to the gambling odds at FanDuel and other places. So while the committee might be underseeding them, and that might need to change in future years, everybody, it seems like a lot of people know how good this team is, and that should make it a very entertaining and excellent game. When 68 teams enter the NCAA tournament, 67 have their seasons end in a loss. And only one gets to win, but there's a whole lot of fun that we have watching us figure out who that one is, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And we try to, and no matter what your bracket looked like I said, there could have been a little leprechaun that set it on fire right out of the gate. I have no idea, but I feel like we are also going to be in for not only great basketball today, but throughout the rest of the tournament. That is truly what March Madness is all about.
I wonder if anyone's ever called Gillette McPhee-McEwen a leprechaun before, but it's an interesting thought.
It might be. You never know. But I know that there are a lot of happy people in Oxford, Mississippi. Congratulations to Ole Miss on a huge win. They keep dancing. There's a lot of other teams that are headed there. And as we said, the rest of the Sweet 16 gets booked today. Catch all of those second round games. All right, Alex, where does everybody find you now as this tournament progresses, my friend?
Yeah, at Bay Area News Group. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex Simon Sports, and I'll figure out something to write about now that Stanford's not playing anymore. We'll have some fun. Well, there's plenty of basketball to be played.
Thank you so much for coming on here today with me. And I want to tell everybody, for those of you that can see me, if you're watching on YouTube, those of you that are listening on all of the apps, I am sporting my purple today. I've got to give props out to my alma mater, Kansas State. Their men's basketball team headed to the Sweet 16 from the Little Apple to the Big Apple. They go this week. Jerome Tang, first-year head coach. That team was picked last in the Big 12, and they are still dancing, and they have made a lot of K-State people very, very proud. So I am sporting my purple today. I'll sport it all week. Very, very proud to be a Wildcat, no doubt about it. So best of luck to K-State as they go to New York for the men's basketball Sweet 16 in the tournament.
Oh, also, today, very brief insert, WNIT game. We get a border war. Kansas, Mizzou.
Yes.
That should be fun. That should be fun.
It is a rival. I mean, all crazy things happen in the Midwest, right? So we're going to get that one too and keep bringing it on. I mean, you never know what happens when you get to this part of the country, my friend. As you said, it's God's time. You never know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
All right. Please join me here next Monday as the NCAA tournament marches on. We got to break down more wins, the upsets, the storylines. It will all be there. And come back all this week for more episodes here on Locked On Women's Basketball with all of our friends. They'll take you through college basketball breakdowns, international WNBA news. We've got everything covered. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today. Now make your second listen Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game NBA covers every game from across your area with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game NBA on the Locked On Network, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, everybody, keep those brackets handy. Cinderella is still dancing. There could be more to join, but the NCAA tournament marches on. We will see you next time right here on Locked On Women's Basketball.